Wait, stop. Hands on the vehicle, now. That's the moment everything collapsed. According to internal reports later referenced in a federal complaint, an undercover operation that had been running quietly for years was compromised in less than 3 minutes. Not by a suspect, not by a leak, but by a routine street-level arrest. A local officer, acting on what he believed was probable cause, detained and cuffed a man who refused to identify himself. That man turned out to be a federal agent, deep undercover. And what happened next didn't just derail an investigation, it ended a career. So how does something like this happen? And more importantly, was it legally justified? Let's break it down. Before we go anywhere further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. We're in a mid-sized US city. Details of the exact location were initially withheld due to the sensitivity of the operation, but records later confirm it was part of a joint federal-local task force area. The officer at the center of this case, we'll call him Officer Daniels, had been on the force for about 8 years. No major disciplinary history, known as proactive, the kind of officer who doesn't wait for calls, he looks for activity. On the other side, the man he stopped, we'll call him Agent Cole, was part of a long-term federal investigation targeting an organized network suspected of trafficking and financial crimes. He wasn't just observing, he was embedded. For months, possibly years, he had built a cover identity, limited contact, strict protocols. And one of those protocols was simple. Do not expose yourself to local law enforcement unless absolutely necessary. That night, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Officer Daniels thought he had just found something suspicious. It starts like many of these encounters do. Body cam footage shows Daniels pulling into a dimly lit parking lot behind a row of businesses. It's late, minimal foot traffic. A vehicle is parked off to the side, engine off, one occupant inside. Daniels slows down. "Hey, what's going on tonight?" Agent Cole doesn't respond immediately. He looks forward, calm, controlled. Daniel steps out. "Roll the window down." The window lowers slightly. "Can I help you?" Cole asks. "Yeah, you can start by telling me what you're doing back here." "Just waiting." "For who?" "Someone." Now, this is where the tone starts to shift. Daniels pauses, looks around. Something doesn't feel right to him. "Do you have ID on you?" "I'd rather not provide that." "Rather not?" "I'm not doing anything illegal." Daniel's posture changes. "Step out of the vehicle." "Am I being detained?" "Yes, step out." Cole hesitates, not out of fear, but calculation. On what grounds? And right there, that question is often where these encounters escalate. Daniels opens the door. "Step out now." Cole complies, slowly, hands visible. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "Officer, I'm cooperating." "Then cooperate." Cuffs go on, and within seconds, the situation moves from a conversation to an arrest. But here's where we need to pause, because at this point, the legal question becomes critical. What did Officer Daniels actually have? In general, police officers are allowed to approach individuals and ask questions without any suspicion at all. That's considered a consensual encounter. But once an officer gives a command, like step out of the vehicle, that typically moves into what's called a detention. And for that, the officer usually needs reasonable suspicion. So what were those facts here? A parked car late at night, a person who didn't want to identify himself. In many jurisdictions, that alone may not be enough. Now, refusal to provide ID can raise suspicion, but it's not automatically illegal in every situation. Some states have stop and identify laws, others don't. And even where they exist, they usually require that the stop itself be lawful to begin with. So if the initial detention wasn't justified, everything that follows becomes questionable. But from Daniel's perspective, this may have looked like evasive behavior in a high-risk area. And this is where officer discretion comes into play, because what an officer believes in the moment doesn't always match what the law requires after the fact. Now, back to the scene. Cole is in handcuffs. Daniels begins a pat-down. "Anything on you I need to know about?" "No." Daniels feels something. Wallet. "Let me see this." Cole tenses slightly. I'd prefer you didn't go through that. Daniels opens it anyway. And inside, he doesn't find drugs or weapons. He finds something else. A badge. Not local. Federal. Daniels freezes. What is this? Cole exhales. Now we have a problem. Within minutes, more units arrive. Radios light up. A supervisor is called. And then, a phone call that changes everything. Because what Daniels didn't know, what he couldn't have known from the outside, is that this wasn't just a random individual. This was an active federal operation. And by detaining Cole, identifying him, and exposing his cover, the entire operation was compromised. Confidential sources pulled back. Targets disappeared. Months, possibly years of work, gone. Now, let's break this down further. Because the second legal issue here isn't just about the stop, it's about the search. Generally, during a lawful detention, an officer can perform a limited pat-down for weapons if they have reason to believe the person may be armed and dangerous. That's based on officer safety. But going into someone's wallet, that's different. That moves beyond a frisk and into a search. And for that, officers usually need either consent, probable cause, or a specific legal exception. So the question becomes, did Daniels have the legal authority to open that wallet? A court may look at whether he believed it contained identification and whether identification was lawfully required at that point. But if the detention itself is shaky, the search becomes even more problematic. And this is where policy and legality start to separate. Because even if something might be defensible in a narrow legal sense, it doesn't mean it was the right call, especially in a situation involving potential interagency conflict. Now, to be fair, Daniels didn't know. There was no alert, no notification, no indication that a federal agent was operating in his patrol area. And that raises another issue entirely: communication. Because in many cases, federal and local agencies coordinate, but not always. And when they don't, situations like this can happen. Now, back to the aftermath. Once the identity was confirmed, Cole was released. No charges filed. But the damage was already done. The federal agency involved filed an internal complaint. An external review followed. Body cam footage was pooled. Supervisors reviewed Daniels' actions step by step. And eventually, a decision was made. Daniels was terminated. Not criminally charged, but administratively removed. The department cited failure to adhere to constitutional standards and departmental policy. There was also a civil claim filed on behalf of the federal operation, alleging that the unlawful detention and search directly led to the collapse of an active investigation. Now, details of that claim were partially sealed, but reports indicate a settlement was reached. And publicly, the department issued a statement emphasizing the importance of measured enforcement and interagency awareness. But here's where the accountability analysis matters. Did Officer Daniels have legal authority to approach and question the individual? Yes. Did he have authority to escalate to a detention? That's less clear. It depends on whether his observations rise to reasonable suspicion. A court could go either way, but many would say the threshold wasn't fully met. Did he have authority to search the wallet? That's even more questionable. And this is where things begin to fall apart. Because once that line is crossed, once a search exceeds its legal scope, everything that follows becomes vulnerable. Now, from Daniels' perspective, he may have believed he was dealing with someone evasive in a suspicious setting. That's not uncommon. But having authority, or believing you have it, does not automatically make the decision wise, necessary, or proportionate. And this is where restraint matters. Because the difference between a brief conversation and the career-ending incident can be one decision, one escalation, one moment where an officer chooses control over caution. At the same time, Agent Cole's refusal to identify himself, while consistent with his role, added to the tension. This was a collision of two systems, local enforcement and federal secrecy. And when those systems don't align, the consequences can be serious, not just for individuals, but for entire investigations. So what's the takeaway here? Encounters like this show how quickly things can escalate, from a simple question to handcuffs to a national-level consequence. For the public, the lesson is straightforward. Remain calm. Do not argue on the roadside. If you're being detained, ask if you're free to leave. If questioned, you can request a lawyer. And if something goes wrong, document everything and address it later through the proper channels, because the street is not the place to win a legal battle. But for law enforcement, the lesson is just as critical. Authority must be balanced with judgment, because every decision, every stop, every search carries consequences that go beyond that moment, and sometimes far beyond what anyone expects. So here's the question. Do you think this was lawful police work under pressure, or did this officer take a routine situation way too far?